All right, let's dive into this stack of legal websites you've given us about New Jersey divorce law. Looks like you're really serious about getting a handle on things.
And you're right to be digging in. New Jersey divorce law, it has its quirks. For example, they've got this whole at-fault and no-fault divorce thing going on.
Yeah, one site jumped right into that, and honestly, it tripped me up a bit. Like, it's no fault, but you still need grounds for divorce. What's that about? Shouldn't no fault mean the reason doesn't matter?
Well, it's not quite that simple. You see, the idea is to make it less about pointing fingers. But the court still needs a legal reason to end the marriage, right? So the most common ground they use is irreconcilable differences, basically saying the marriage is beyond repair. But here's the catch, even that can be challenged by your spouse.
So you can't just waltz in saying we're done and expect everything to be signed, sealed, and delivered.
Exactly. It's a process. Evidence matters, even in a no-fault situation.
Okay, so then what about at-fault divorces?
Now, at-fault divorce, that's a whole different ballgame. This is where things can get a little messier.
A little. One of these law firm websites, it listed things like adultery, addiction, even emotional cruelty as grounds for an at-fault divorce. Talk about intense, but then they talk about defenses to these accusations. Seems like a whole lot of legal loopholes.
Well, think of it this way. The legal system wants to be fair, right? Even when things are messy. Let's say you're accusing your spouse of being unfaithful, but then they turn around and prove that you weren't exactly a saint either. That's what they call recrimination, meaning both sides messed up. So it's hard to point the finger at just one person.
So it becomes this whole blame game where no one wins.
Precisely. That's why having strong evidence is key, not just throwing out accusations. And this, my friend, is where having a good lawyer by your side becomes invaluable.
Speaking of tricky situations, I came across this term, connivance. Is that like encouraging the behavior you're then going to use to divorce them for? Seems kind of out there.
I know, right? Sounds unbelievable. But it happens. Basically, the law tries to stop people from trying to set up their spouse for a quicker divorce. So let's say you nudge your spouse into cheating, then bam, file for divorce based on adultery. The court's going to see right through that.
Wow, so no scheming for a faster exit. Got it.
Exactly. And there's this other thing, too, called condonation. It's like, imagine knowing about your spouse's gambling problem for years, but staying in the marriage. You can't suddenly turn around years later and use that same gambling problem as grounds for divorce. By staying, the court sees it as you accepting or condoning that behavior.
So consistency and fairness matter, even when emotions are running high. But let's get real for a sec. Once you get past all the grounds for divorce stuff, what about dividing up property? Is it always a clean 50-50 split in New Jersey?
That's where things get interesting with what they call equitable distribution. Sounds straightforward, right? But equitable doesn't necessarily mean equal.
Okay, so what does it actually mean then?
It means the court looks at each spouse's income, their potential to earn, who gets custody of the kids, even how long the marriage lasted, and then they decide what's fair.
I can see how that could lead to some disagreements, like what if one person put their career on hold to raise children while the other one was climbing the career ladder?
Exactly. That's a perfect example. The court might consider the future earning potential of the spouse who stayed home, not just their current income, which is likely lower. The goal is to give both sides a fair chance at rebuilding financially.
Sounds like having a sharp lawyer to fight for your side would be crucial in a situation like that.
Absolutely. And we haven't even touched on alimony, child support, or the complexities of custody arrangements.
Speaking of which, while going through these websites, I saw something about annulment. Seems so much simpler than divorce. Is it really?
Well, it is simpler in the sense that it's like hitting the undo button on the whole marriage. Legally speaking, it's like it never happened. But qualifying for an annulment, that's a whole other story. It's much harder.
So when would someone even try to get an annulment?
Usually, it's when the marriage wasn't valid from the get-go. Like if your spouse was still married to someone else when you got married.
Whoa, that's wild, like something out of a movie.
You'd be surprised how often it actually happens. But there are other reasons for annulment. Fraud, coercion, even if one spouse was underage when they got married. It's not just about ending the marriage, it's about addressing a serious issue that existed from the very beginning.
So an annulment is definitely something to consider, but only in very specific situations.
Exactly. And with those unique situations in mind, I think it's the perfect time to shift gears and dive into what's often the most sensitive and emotionally charged aspect of many divorces: the kids.
Because when kids are involved, divorce becomes about so much more than just the two spouses, right?
Absolutely. And the courts in New Jersey know that.
Right.
They put the well-being of the children above everything else.
So we're back, still digging deep into the world of New Jersey divorce law. Right before the break, we were getting into some pretty heavy topics: fault, annulment, even that connivance thing. But now, let's shift gears to something that's often the most emotionally charged part of any divorce: the kids.
Absolutely. And in New Jersey, the courts are very clear. When there are children involved, their well-being comes first and foremost. It's not about what mom or dad wants. It's about what's best for the kids.
Makes sense. But how do the courts figure out what's best when you've got two parents, maybe with totally different ideas about how to raise their kids?
Well, they look at a whole range of things: the parents' living situations, their work schedules, each parent's relationship with the kids, any history of abuse or neglect. It's all on the table.
So they're really trying to get the whole picture, not just making a quick judgment.
Right. And while the courts often see joint custody, where both parents share responsibility, as the ideal situation, it's not always realistic or what's best for the child. Sometimes one parent might get primary custody, meaning the kids live with them most of the time, and the other parent gets visitation rights.
And I'm guessing those visitation schedules can be pretty different depending on the situation.
You got it. The goal is to make sure the kids have meaningful relationships with both parents, as long as it's safe and healthy for them, of course. And it's not like it's set in stone.
Yeah.
As kids grow up, their needs change, and the custody arrangements can be adjusted to reflect that.
That makes a lot of sense. Now let's talk about the financial side of things. Divorce with kids isn't just about where they live. It's also about making sure they're taken care of financially. I saw alimony and child support thrown around a lot in these legal documents. What's the difference?
Child support is pretty clear-cut. It's money specifically for the child's needs: food, housing, education, all that. Both parents have to contribute, and the amount is usually determined by their incomes and a formula the state uses.
So even if one parent has primary custody, the other parent still has to chip in financially.
You bet. Now, alimony, sometimes called spousal support, is different. That's money paid from one ex-spouse to the other after the divorce.
When is alimony awarded, though?
It's often granted when there's a big difference in income between the spouses, especially if one spouse put their career on hold to raise the kids or support their partner's career. It's about making sure both people have a fair shot at financial stability after the divorce.
So if one spouse makes way more money, they might have to pay alimony to even things out.
That's the gist of it. But of course, it can get complicated. The court will factor in how long the marriage lasted, each spouse's earning potential, even their age and health, when deciding how much alimony to award and for how long.
Sounds like a lot of moving parts. This really emphasizes why having a good lawyer who understands the ins and outs of New Jersey law is so important.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of nuanced legal situations, remember when we touched on palimony earlier? It's not directly about having kids, but it's definitely worth revisiting here.
Yeah, that's right. That's where couples who are never officially married might still be entitled to some financial support after they split up. I was surprised to hear that's even a thing in New Jersey.
It is. But proving it, that can be tricky. The court has to be convinced that you are in a committed, marriage-like relationship, even without that piece of paper.
So what kind of evidence would make a palimony claim stronger?
Things like joint bank accounts, owning property together, even having friends and family testify about the nature of your relationship. Anything that shows you are in it for the long haul and financially intertwined, just like a married couple would be.
Seems like navigating palimony is another one of those areas where having a skilled attorney in your corner is a must.
100%. And as we head into the final stretch of our New Jersey divorce law deep dive, let's remember one crucial thing: knowledge is power.
Couldn't agree more. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this whole process and make the best decisions for yourself and your kids. So, let's get down to brass tacks. How do you actually file for divorce? What can you expect in court? All those nitty-gritty details.
Let's do it.
And we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into New Jersey divorce law. We've covered a lot of ground, from the emotional stuff like custody battles to the financial nitty-gritty of alimony and child support.
It's a lot, no doubt. But remember, the more you know, the better equipped you are to handle whatever comes your way. Knowledge is power, especially in a situation like